Hello, and welcome to my third episode of this podcast of mine, Leah on the Line. I'm Leah Hartman, and welcome to my podcast. I have a lot of different topics we're going to talk about today, but it's all inside the women's basketball world. They all have to do with the WNBA. But first, to start off, I'm going to tell a little personal story. I'm going to explain to you kind of how I got into playing basketball. I got into basketball when I was in kindergarten, and I, at the time, was living in Storrs, Connecticut. So my dad was a professor at UConn, and for this reason, we moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, to Connecticut. I was around kindergarten or first grade when we moved, and just for backstory as well, my dad is a former college basketball player, huge basketball fan. Basketball is his favorite sport. And when I was in kindergarten, he just, throughout working at the university, one day was given free women's basketball tickets. So naturally, he brought me and my younger sister, who must have been 3 or 4 at the time. Our house that we were living in was faculty housing. So the house was quite literally steps away from campus. I don't remember a lot of living there because I was very young, but I do remember a good amount of it. I remember there being a lot of college kids around, and at the time, I think because I was so young, college students scared me because they were like really grown and tall and all that. One day, he had the tickets. We probably walked over to the stadium, holding my dad's hand, went into the stadium and went up the bleachers to the very, very, very top. And I remember sitting at the very, very, very top of the stadium and having these like super nosebleed seats. And I remember the lights going dark and getting scared again. Like the atmosphere was confusing to me at the time. All of these lights start flashing. They're doing the player intros. So I remember getting a little scared, like what's all this music, all this hip hop, like what's going on here? And then I remember the game started. And my dad tells me this now, that pretty much the entire game, my eyes were glued onto the court. And it's funny now, we joke about it as a family because he says that my sister was staring at the cheerleaders while I was staring at the game the entire time. And so that was my very, very, very first introduction to basketball, was at this UConn game. Maya Moore, Diana Taurasi, Tina Charles, many more that played there while I was there. I think when I went in kindergarten, I think Diana Taurasi was playing. Yeah, that sounds right, because she just retired and she's like 40. That sounds about right. So yeah, those are my favorite players growing up. Definitely, it's one of those things that looking back at it now, it signifies the beginning of like me getting into basketball, but I think also just thinking about the environment that I was in at the gym, again, with the lights going dark and the whole performance aspect of it and how the players, the women on the court, were performing. And I thought it was something so admirable that they were doing. And I think that aspect of like performance in front of cameras and in front of an audience, everyone's watching the same thing happen at the same time during a live game, a basketball game or any sporting game, was something that really intrigued me. And that's something that I still kind of am thinking of now as I like pursue my career. You know, that's definitely something that's of interest to me. I hope for myself, and if anyone's listening right now that's in kind of a similar situation of like, what do I want to do? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? And it's very hard to like build something from the ground up, but it's kind of, I think lately I've had a lot of peace with what I'm doing and how I'm approaching it, and knowing that like it could go in any direction, kind of. I think it's more of a freeing feeling than like a scary feeling for me. Okay, so let's start into the contents of the podcast. First, we're going to be talking some statistics today. So I'm going to be talking team valuations. So what are WNBA teams worth today? So as of June 2025, Forbes put the average franchise in the WNBA value around $272 million. And the reported minimum that the least that a franchise makes is $190 million, with top franchises being substantially higher than this $190 million. But the average is $272. So this represents a dramatic year-over-year increase as interest, media deals, and new owners have really pushed this value up, along, obviously, most importantly, with the players themselves, making the game exciting, but also with more attention being brought to the WNBA through broadcast deals and making the game really accessible for everyone to be able to watch it. And just to remember, these valuations, they're different from how much like liquid cash they have. They're kind of more of a projection of expected profits and market value. And market value. The WNBA league value as of 2025 is $326 billion. So later on in this podcast, we're going to come back to these numbers and they're going to make a lot more sense. I'm going to compare them with some previous numbers so that we can look at how much things have jumped. But just to put one statistic out there, between 2022 and 2025, the WNBA's estimated valuation increased from $468 million in 2022 to $3.26 billion, nearly a 7 times jump in the past 3 years. We're going to be talking more about that later. But recently, there has been an influx in revenue in the WNBA. After years of struggling on the business end, 6 new expansion teams by 2030 is obviously going to add a lot more value to the league. And an 11-year, $2.2 billion media deal with Disney, Amazon, NBC Universal, and this is set to begin in 2026. I personally think the number one most important thing for sports in terms of media is the broadcast, because how are you going to access a game to watch it unless you're obviously there, which is in comparison not that many people, if you can't access the game? How are you going to watch it? And if they're not free, if they're not televised on accessible stations, how do you expect people to watch it? So I think this is huge. I think this is going to change a lot and increase numbers even more than we've already seen in previous years. The CBA, which the players want to change to now in the next few months represent this growth of revenue in the WNBA, was set to expire on October 31st, but it has now been pushed back by a 30-day extension for the negotiations to continue. My opinion on this, I think that the negotiations are going to be pushed back even further. I think this first 30-day, we're going to see it again. I think it'll keep getting pushed back, and honestly, it could be pushed back close to the start of the WNBA season. And I think that this honestly should happen. I think the players should push as hard as they can. We've seen in previous years that CBA negotiations have gone up to January, February, close to the start of the season, and given where things are right now, I don't see why that wouldn't also be the case. But I do think that with the current things that, they're asking, they haven't been done before, it will get ugly, I think, from a negotiation standpoint on the business side when it comes to how much revenue, if they will be able to get a revenue share. I think it will get ugly. But I think that the players should push for this. It's something that should be top of the mind, that obviously isn't top of the mind to a lot of owners and a lot of people in leadership positions. So again, I think the CBA negotiation is going to get pushed back past this 30-day extension and again and again and again into 2026. That is my prediction. So now I'm going to give a little bit of history here that's affecting why the current CBA negotiation is so complex when it comes to why players are not able to get this revenue share, specifically for the WNBA. And this functions like no other league in professional sports. So let's break it down. In 2020, when the current CBA was signed, they implemented something called a 50-50 revenue split trigger. So what this is this essentially was the league promising revenue share for the players contingent on if the league was able to hit revenue benchmarks based on money that the league was projected to make during the 2019 2020 season. These benchmarks were never publicly disclosed, so we don't actually know how much revenue they had to hit for this trigger to come. But otherwise, if it didn't, then what would happen is the salary caps would remain. So in simple words, they said if certain teams, if the league can make a certain amount of money this year, then that will trigger a 50-50 revenue split where players will now be paid more and they will get a revenue share of the profit that the WNBA is making. The problem with this is that this was made just before COVID hit in 2020. So not just for the WNBA, but for all sports leagues, fans couldn't attend games. This caused a super big plummet in their attendance, profit, everything was almost at an all-time low. And so they didn't hit this benchmark number that they were hoping to get to trigger the 50-50 revenue split that they had hoped would happen. In the CBA negotiation, this was all laid out. This was set to expire in 2028, was initially made in 2019-2020 for the 2020 CBA. So, this then made the CBA negotiation regarding salaries unusable because it was an impossible benchmark at the time to hit. And I'm sure at the time this sounded like a great step in the right direction. Some positivity could come from this, something that's never been done before, revenue share. But for the players, I think it just ended up being worse off because of COVID. But also, I think it kind of just sounds like they got screwed over a little bit. And I think this honestly, a little bit just goes to show how much lack of faith there was in the product, in the WNBA itself, in the game itself and the players, and how much potential they had to be able to make a profit in the future. Just some more numbers so that we understand how much money is actually being given to these teams, has been. So this is data from 2025. So if you think about it, this is probably maybe the most it's ever been. The salary cap in 2025 per team is $1.46 million per team. Okay, salary cap. So we're thinking there's 12-ish players per team. Okay, so that's just over 100,000 if you're going to split it evenly per player. The maximum player salary is around 252,000, and you have to have 7 years of playing experience in order to get that. So say one person has 252,000, that puts your 1.46 million down because now you have to split that remaining. So people, are making under $100,000 now with this cap. But the minimum salary ranges from $64,000 to $76,000, depending on years of experience. So yeah, a rookie coming in, will be making within that range. So the NBA does not function this way. Their salaries grow along with the business. And since I have a ton of people in my comments saying that they want to treat the WNBA like a startup business, okay, let's do that. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say the WNBA is a startup business, and you're the owner, and your product is growing in attention. Matter of fact, it's not even growing in attention, it's booming. Okay, this is the latest, hottest thing that people are talking about. Everyone's talking about your product, and they can't stop talking about it. Internationally, your product is the next big thing. And would you want to invest in your product? Since the business wouldn't function without whatever your product is leading this, not you. Whatever it is that you're investing in here is gaining all this attention. Say you're even losing money in the beginning because it is a startup. Say we're doing a thought experiment, right? Say it is a startup and you're losing money. Would you still invest in your product? Even if it was losing money in the beginning, but your product is being talked about by everyone in the world. Like, quite literally, everyone has an opinion on Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Like, let's be honest. So, like, everyone's talking about it. Everyone knows about it. It's currently still trending. You're breaking record attendance. Would you invest in it itself? Knowing that your product is irreplaceable. The people around your product are replaceable. The donors, the investors. If one leaves, bring in a new one. You can't bring in a new Caitlin Clark. You can't bring in a new Breanna Stewart, a new Diana Taurasi, a new Asia Wilson, a new Kelsey Mitchell. These things aren't happening. Like, what you have is what you have. I think it is important to think about it in that way. WNBA players asking for more money is saying, are you willing to invest in your product? It's small business 101, right? It's small business 101. What would you do? So Cathy Engelbert does not have the direct ability to decide what players are making based on revenue share and all things pertaining to that specifically. Her boss, Adam Silver, has the authority to override these decisions. And here's the big question. Is Cathy or Adam to blame here? Cathy reports to the owners of the WNBA. She also reports to Adam Silver, who also reports to the NBA owners. So there's a lot of people involved. It's a really complicated process, unlike the NBA. I do think there are things that Cathy Engelbert herself is doing that's not productive, that doesn't have anything to do with Adam Silver. But at the end of the day, if he is her boss, how is he overseeing this and what are his intentions? Cathy Engelbert obviously has a great general idea of how business works, how raising capital works, coming from Deloitte, but does this translate to running a women's basketball league, specifically the WNBA? I'm not too sure. I wouldn't say that. Like, I think there's a lot of things that you might not think would be important when relating to women's basketball players that me as a women's basketball player myself that I know are important. Not just a women's basketball player specifically, but any athlete really, to run any sports league. There's a lot of relational elements to being a coach, to being an owner, to relating to players that is not just about numbers, it's not just about raising capital, it's not just about the sport itself. And I think that a lot of times the more relationships that you have, the better you are at doing business because you understand what certain people will want, and at the end of the day, what's going to push the entire league forward as a whole. Players and league officials and leaders in the front office, everyone included. The WNBA's ownership is unlike any other league. It is split into 3 buckets. 42% is owned by the WNBA, 42% is owned by the NBA, and 16% is owned by major public figures and companies like Nike. So the 16% was a decision that was sold in 2022 by Cathy Engelbert to raise capital, $75 million, in an effort to revamp the league's digital footprint and hire more human capital. So these are the 3 buckets that the WNBA exists in terms of its ownership. So this complicates the process when it comes to the CBA and revenue share because all parties want a return on the league's recent growth. WNBA owners, NBA owners, and this 16% of public figures and companies all want a piece of the pie. They all want to profit off of what's happening in the WNBA. The players also want a piece of this pie, which is not included in this. So this obviously, because it's not all going to one pot, this complicates the process. But specific to the NBA team owners' ownership bucket, they specifically feel more of a need to make up for the investments that they have made in the WNBA over the past that they have not yet been compensated for. So there is more of a pushback from the NBA owners and saying, we deserve more money here because we have invested for XYZ amount of years, and this is what the numbers show the profit has been. So everyone's kind of at odds on whose share will go up, what these different buckets will get in terms of revenue, if players will get equal, or if players will get revenue share, and who will profit off of the recent boom in interest in the WNBA. Who's going to profit off of the recent interest in the WNBA? And I think my opinion on this is it keeps going back to invest in the product. Because the league wouldn't be anything without the players. And a business wouldn't be anything without its product. So if you invest in the people, I don't see how there could ever be a world where that would go poorly. Owners can be replaced. I mean, look at what happened in Atlanta. Owners can be replaced. Players cannot. It does kind of sound like everyone's kind of looking out for themselves. And because of this, the players are somewhat under the rule and the power of the owners. Does the ownership in the WNBA structure seem fair or built to protect certain owners? It does kind of seem like everyone's kind of out looking for themselves. And they like to use this word share. Are we going to give them a share of the money, a revenue share? Because I think it sounds kind of like optimistic. But I think in reality, power might be the better word. Because it's essentially saying who holds the power to take agency over their own financial prosperity. So if we're giving you a revenue share of this, if the owners are giving, the players a revenue share, if Adam Silver is going to give the players of the WNBA a revenue share, it's essentially giving up power in some way over the revenue that the WNBA is making. It's a power over money. It's a whole system. And I think share is a very optimistic way to look at it. But at the end of the day, as Nneka said, it's not personal. It's business. They just want to be compensated. And giving up revenue share is kind of like giving up some power to access the money. This is a quote by journalist Sarah Spain. "It has not been beneficial to be under the thumb of someone who does not deeply invest in the product or does not believe in it the way that many do, or has proved that it's a viable product." Who's making the decisions on their behalf, meaning on the behalf of the WNBA? I think for anyone that has a job, anyone that works in business, anyone that works in corporate, you understand how networking and how sponsorship works, and how yes, you need to have people that you are in conversation with, but it's also important to have someone who can sponsor you, someone who can speak about you and for you in rooms that you are not able to be a part of. And that will help to elevate you. And that's what I think is missing here on the business side of the WNBA, is they don't necessarily have the strongest pro-women's basketball, pro-WNBA voices speaking on behalf of them when it comes to ownership and leadership, and in terms of if the players will get revenue share. Do I think this all falls in the hands of Cathy Engelbert? I don't think all of it. I think that there's many people involved that it falls on. I think that Cathy Engelbert has been at fault for making poor relationship-oriented decisions, which have then led to her not having a complete understanding of what the players want and need, which has made her decision-making not reflect the best interest of the players. That's more so what I would say on her behalf. I don't think it all falls on her shoulders. So what happens in the WNBA if no agreement is made by the extension date? So both sides essentially enter a status quo period where the rules from the previous CBA will still be in effect while negotiations continue. Players will still be able to use facilities and all that stuff. So in the case that a strike or a lockout happens, players would no longer have access to team facilities. And in only a strike, then players could not talk to coaches or team executives. So there is a difference between those two things, between them just simply not coming to an agreement and there being a lockout or a strike. in the case of just nothing is decided, kind of nothing happens. If there is specifically a strike, then a lot of things will be affected. In my opinion, I think that the players' union, I think that the players, they need to push as hard as possible until they can't anymore. I think that Nafisa Collier and the rest of the council, it could get bad, it could get ugly. I hope they push. I think they will push. And I think the CBA will get pushed again past this 30-day extension until they get what they want or make their voices heard. I don't see any backing down or any settling happening. And I do also want to clarify, me saying that I do think they will push doesn't mean that I think that they will do something bad for the league, bad for the WNBA, or for another best interest such as in Unrivaled. I think that that's like totally just not the correct way to think. But I do think that they should push as hard as possible solely for the best interests of the WNBA and for the players. The cultural footprint of the WNBA is at stake here. And the show must go on at some point. A work stoppage would be devastating on the business side. It would also be devastating in terms of keeping players relevant and keeping this momentum pushing. That would not be good at all. At the same time, there is a level that they are going to need to push in order for some change to happen. So I think it's going to be really important. I don't know in what way this would be, but for them to kind of find a happy medium between, we don't want, the league to necessarily stop or for there to be a huge setback in terms of the money that they've been making and the progress that they've been making, but at the same time, for the inner workings of the league and the way that money is distributed to change. So this information is from Jackie Powell at NBC Sports. The WNBA and its players have agreed upon previous CBAs just before the start of the new season. The 2020 CBA was ratified mid-January. The 2014 CBA was agreed upon in mid-February, and then in 2008, the CBA, which came at a time when the Dream were being added to the league, was agreed to at the end of January. And then back in 2003, the league held its amateur draft the same day that its second CBA was ratified, just 17 days before the season. And lastly, the first WNBA CBA was agreed upon just days before training camp opened in the spring of 1999. So as we see here, this has always kind of historically been something that has been pushed to the last moment. I don't think that's coincidence. I think it is probably for the exact same reason that's happening right now. It's because they're pushing for something that's not being met on the other side, and there's definitely tension and pushback, and that's why it's being pushed forward further. Because why wouldn't they be, oh yeah, okay, we're going to agree on this, sure, sign off on it months in advance when it was due? No, it's literally always been pushed back. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the 3-bucket conversation where we have the WNBA ownership, the NBA ownership, and this 16% ownership in the WNBA. This is breaking down the ownership in terms of who owns percentages of the revenue and of the entirety of the WNBA as a franchise, including all teams and everything to do with the WNBA. So let's further break this down, this 16% over here, because we haven't talked much about that yet. So this 16% in 2022 was raised by Cathy Engelbert, the commissioner, in exchange for $75 million in capital. This was done at a time when Cathy wanted to build momentum in the league, specifically to increase media, marketing, and overall efficiency of the league. She did this post-COVID in 2022 when the league was almost at an all-time low, or it might have been actually at an all-time low because of attendance issues, and it was horrible. So many people say that this exchange, 16% of the league for $75 million, delivered business growth overall for the WNBA, which inherently it did a bit. But But this is now affecting the CBA negotiation and making it harder to negotiate between the players' union, the WNBPA, and the league, the WNBA, the owners, because this is a slice of the money and potentially revenue that the players could have had. And this deal was made in 2022 before the recent explosion in value of the WNBA. So did this deal pre-sell potential future upside? This reduced the pool of league revenue that is now available. And this is a very contested interpretation that has been raised by critics and has caused a lot of public discussion. Some say it was a genius move. Others say it sold the future upside too cheaply. So let's look at the numbers. So Cathy's 16% equity in the WNBA for $75 million. The total WNBA league value in 2025 is $3.26 billion. In 2022, the projected valuation is roughly $468 million. So in 3 years, we have around a 7 times increase in value in the WNBA. If 16% of the WNBA were sold today, it would be worth $522 million. She got 16% in 2022 for $75 million. So this is now adding context to this conversation. The positives of selling this 16% was that the WNBA completed what was described as the largest ever capital raise for a women's sports property, the $75 million. And it helped raise, and that raise helped anchor a valuation of the league and teams at about $1 billion at the time of the deal. So teams individually are rising in their individual value. And this kind of valuation boosts signals to investors, sponsors, and media partners that women's pro sports, and specifically the WNBA, are credible in business. There have been several sources that have said, for example, an article from Swish Appeal reports that the stakeholder structure and this raise were described by sources as a, quote, costly mistake because the league locked in a lower valuation before major growth. In 2024, Fast Company article, Engelbert said, when I joined in 2019, we had one marketing person. Now in 2026, that capital allowed us to hire people so that we could get to work on analytics and fan data, as well as social media. We could also deploy a digital transformation through our app. However, despite this ambition, the players and staff continue to cite travel, logistical, infrastructure, and player operational support issues and unresolved things. For example, in 2023, a survey found that travel was the biggest issue for players, over 50%, despite this $75 million in capital raise. So there's differing opinions on how the money was used, what it was used for, but it looks like overall it did increase the value of teams, which is a positive. But then again, 16% of the company is now sold to outside investors. It's money that cannot be reinvested into specifically the players in terms of salary or anything else. And looking at where the WNBA is now in 2025, 7 times more value than it was 3 years ago in 2022, was this a good decision to make? Considering that COVID had just hit, the WNBA was at a record low, I think it's hard to say if this was the right decision or not. It's really hard to say. But I think more of the question that I keep coming back to is, would the WNBA still be where it is today if this deal was never made? Was it a league-saving deal? It wasn't. It wasn't a league-saving deal. The WNBA was at a record low, but it wasn't going to cease to exist. And I think, again, the thing that kind of put the WNBA on the map in a way has been the players. It's what initially drew attraction to women's basketball in 2023. And it's what has been keeping people watching over the past 3 years. Has been the players and getting to know one player and then becoming a fan of the team and then supporting another player. Like, we've seen it happen on multiple teams, multiple occasions. So yeah, there's not really an exact answer to this. Should she have made the deal? Was it, I think you could maybe argue for both, but I do think at the end of the day, it did in a way pre-sell their potential. And I'm not an economist or a business person, but looking from my knowledge of all of this and also being a women's basketball player and having played my entire life and being fans of these women, I would say that I do again think that a lot of the people that are making decisions and at the level of the WNBA, but also in college basketball, people that work in the broadcasts, don't necessarily have the player's best interest in mind. They might not even know anything about players. They're just making money off of it. And I'm not saying that Cathy Engelbert specifically is doing this. I don't know her. But I do think overall there is an element of not believing in the product, not believing in the players and in the game itself, that it is interesting. Like, are these owners, are they a WNBA fan without the money? Like, are they true WNBA fans and advocates like they are for the NBA? I don't think that's the case for a lot of them. And that's what's dangerous, is not really believing in it or seeing its potential, not having a critical eye to analyze that, and then making decisions and selling equity in the league 16% without realizing what's coming, because you're not a true fan or advocate of the game. You just know numbers and how to raise capital. That's the issue. The other thing is, with this $75 million, it looks like it was put towards a lot of marketing and human capital and their digital footprint. To me, again, in my understanding as a player, I think the most important thing, along with everything to do with the player themselves, so that would be facility, quality of facility, coaches, all that stuff. The most important thing outside of that, from a media perspective, in my opinion, is broadcast. Because if you can't see the game, how are people going to watch it? It has to be accessible where you can turn on the TV, and along with an NBA game, you can also watch a WNBA game. And so it doesn't look like this $75 million was put at all towards that. Cathy Engelbert did, in 2024, sign a media rights deal with Walt Disney Company, ESPN, ABC, Amazon Prime Video, and NBC Universal, covering an 11-year period beginning in 2026. So the previous deal that they had in place was $50 to $60 million per year, and now it's $200 million per year. So this is really expanding the broadcast coverage that will be accessible to fans and to viewers that like the WNBA and women's basketball. These are just some overall overarching questions that I have. Do you think that the league had to raise capital at that moment? Could they have waited until valuations were higher? I know that they didn't know exactly what was coming, but again, if you are a women's basketball fan, as I'm saying, and like a critic, there is a way to kind of, I mean, okay, because I played against Caitlin Clark in college. And so I think for me, like, all this stuff was already interesting. It was already a topic of conversation. I was all in it. Like, me and my teammates and like everyone that played college basketball or, it was currently playing overseas, like, we're in it. So for me, it's easy to say, like, yeah, like, I saw that potential in 2019, in 2015. Yeah, I saw that potential. Me, a 15-year-old kid. But, as someone who is outside of that world, they need to then see that potential. And that's what I think missed the mark here. Do I think it was a mistake? Again, it's hard to exactly say what the effects would and would have not been, but I do think overall it could have been evaluated differently. Maybe the numbers could have been different. I don't know. And from a player's perspective, does the capital raise help or hurt their bargaining position? Does selling that equity now reduce the size of pie that they can claim later? Yes, it does. So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate those conversations when it comes to them wanting a revenue share in the league as well. On the leadership side, if a business leader brings in major capital but fails to connect with stakeholders, players, how much does that undermine the long-term effects of the deal? Something also to think about. And lastly, there are a few quotes here that I've gathered from players who've had opinions on this. Lisa Leslie quotes, Cathy, yes, has done, I think, a really good job of helping raise capital, but, and then in the rest of the quote, she goes on to giving a more mixed evaluation of Cathy Engelbert's ability to be an effective leader. Based on, this is a quote, this is quoted Brianna Stewart on the CBA negotiation and league growth, quote, based on their most recent proposal, we just aren't able to get to a place where we're actually even talking about the same thing. So she's obviously expressing frustration with where their minds are even at in the conversation. And Nafisa Collier quotes, the real threat to our league isn't money, it's the lack of accountability from the league office, end quote. So, those are three, Lisa Leslie's former player, but Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier are both current players who are also on the WNBA, and they're having a big say in the conversation when it comes to what the CBA negotiation is going to be for the upcoming years in the WNBA. So, we'll see what happens. But I think, again, understanding some of this stuff when it comes to how the numbers are actually broken down in those three buckets and why it's so challenging for them. It works differently in the NBA and, in other leagues where it's all the revenues coming to one pot of ownership, and that's not the case. It's an overcomplicated process. I think there should be a way to decomplicate it. I'm not a business person, but I hope that they can figure that out. These are just some of my thoughts when it comes to where the league is at right now. But yeah, this is everything that I have for this episode. And again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week for episode 4.